Okay. Okay, let's resume. Prabhupada Nectar, Chapter 1, Section 21 onwards. Okay. Prabhupada, give it to me. Prabhupada regularly gave out cookies from the Vyasasana, but on a visit to New Vrindavan, he once gave out an entire meal of prasadam right off the deity's plate. Radhanath Das had a strong desire, approached Srila Prabhupada with the deity's plate immediately after offering it to Radha Vrindavan Chandra. So he rather boldly approached Srila Prabhupada on the Vyasasana. At first, he had been stopped by At first, he had been stopped by Srila Prabhupada's secretary, Pushta Krishna, who asked, "Where are the cookies?" Radhanath said, "They had none, only this full deity plate." "Forget it," said Pushta Krishna. "You can't give out that kind of stuff." But Radhanath managed to approach Prabhupada from a different direction. When Srila Prabhupada saw the plate, he smiled, took it up, and began sampling each preparation with a spoon. He took a spoonful of sweet rice, tasted it, and then began handing out spoonfuls. Over 100 devotees were present, and they rushed forward, unlike their usual formal lines for receiving a cookie. Prabhupada went from preparation to preparation, eating a few spoonfuls of sabji, and then distributing it to the urgent, outstretched hands of the surrounding devotees. After finishing each preparation, he also gave away the silver bowl. Finally, all that was left were 2 large gulab jamuns. Children began to cry out, "Prabhupada, give it to me." Srila Prabhupada took his time, and at last, he shook his head no. He took the gulab jamun up himself and bit into 2. At the first bite, the gulab jamun juice squirted out, wetting several nearby devotees who began dancing and shouting. After 2 bites, Srila Prabhupada gave out the remnants of the gulab jamun. His first bite of the second gulab jamun also produced a stream of juice, and by now the whole temple room was turned into a state of happy pandemonium. The whole episode lasted about 15 minutes, and Srila Prabhupada was obviously feeling great enjoyment, laughing and watching everyone, trying to get the Mahaprasadam from his hand. This is an interview with Radhanath Swami Maharaj. Prabhupada said, on Kirtana and music, the harmonium may be played during bhajan if there is someone who can play melodiously, but it is not for Kirtan and Arati. That's 1976. Prabhupada was present during a Kirtan performed by his disciples in the Brooklyn temple. For the devotees, it was the perfection of their singing and playing. To do it for Prabhupada's personal pleasure. The Mridanga player had been practicing to learn complicated beats, and he was demonstrating his rapid and intricate abilities in the Kirtan. But Prabhupada stopped the music and said to the drummer, a devotee named Dhira Krishna, that he should follow the leader. Then he started the Kirtan again, but it happened again and again. It happened again, and again Prabhupada stopped the Kirtan and asked the drummer to follow the leader. On another occasion, Prabhupada said, the drum should not be louder than the voice. In 1966 in New York City, a boy came with a record of a famous Indian musician playing sitar. As soon as the music began, Srila Prabhupada started to smile. The boy asked, "Do you like this music?" The Prabhupada said, "This is sense gratification music." The boy was hurt and said, "What do you mean? They play this in the temples in India." The Prabhupada insisted, "No, this is sense gratification music. And this musician is just a businessman." The boy then replied, "Well, you used to be a businessman." Prabhupada laughed and said, "Because I went naked then, I should go naked now?" "Well, what if this musician wanted to become a devotee?" asked the boy. Oh, that would be very nice, said Prabhupada, if he can come. But this is sense gratification music. Prabhupada's very clear concept of what is acceptable if you want to progress in pure devotion service and what is not. The incident about the Mridanga following the leader is from Vishnu Gadadas interview. The comment that the drum should not be louder than the voice was recalled by Abhiram Das, who heard Prabhupada say it in Calcutta. The sitar music incident is from Umapati Das interview. Palika Devi Das, he also recalls that Prabhupada did not like harmoniums played during the kirtan. His comment was that it would drag the kirtan. Prabhupada used to say that his Guru Maharaj, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, banged the kartals together and would only have kartals and mridanga played for kirtan. The point is that artistic musicianship can sometimes be distracting from chanting the holy name. Krishna mantra should be sung and chanted both for Cheto Darpana Marjana, for purification of the heart. It's for this purpose. That doesn't mean that if there are two devotees who are equally good in Krishna consciousness and one can sing nicely and the other sings very bad, doesn't mean that both of them can be given the mic. There is a consideration. But still, the higher consideration is Krishna consciousness. Who is challenging my authority? In India, Srila Prabhupada once gave Tejas Das advice on how to elicit the help of big men. He told him to use the rabbit and lion philosophy. Once a group of rabbits were being eaten by a lion. So they made an agreement and met with the lion, pleading with him to limit his killing. They said, we're all terrified and you also are not getting to eat every day. So why don't we make this agreement that every day one of us will come to you and you can eat us. In that way, we will not be so terrified and you will at least get one rabbit a day. The lion agreed to the proposal, but one day, one of the more intelligent rabbits thought, what is this? Why am I rushing into death? This is my last day. Let me enjoy on the way. So in a very leisurely way, stopping sometimes beside a river and then a well, the rabbit finally arrived late before the lion. The lion was very angry and roared, why have you come late? The rabbit replied, it's not my fault. Because on the way, another lion said he was going to eat me. It was all that I could do to get away from him. The lion said, who's challenging my authority? Let me find him. So the rabbit led him to the edge of a well and said, he's in there. The lion looked inside and saw the shadow of a lion. Then he roared. The reflection lion roared back. So the lion jumped into the well to attack. In this way, the rabbit finished the lion. Famous story. Buddhiryasya balam tasya nirbuddhestu kutah balam pashya simho madonmattas shashakena nivaditaha. Let me see if Prabhupada has also quoted this. The man who's got buddhi is a strong man. Hitopadesh story. The rabbit killed the big lion by intelligence. The meaning of this shloka is, he who has intelligence has strength. Where is their strength for the unintelligent? Look, a lion who was intoxicated by pride was made to fall down by a mere rabbit. Prabhupada told AGS that he could also do that. If a high-level man says something favorable, then he can go back to him and complain on his behalf. Tell him that you have told one of his clerks or ministers that the top level man says they must give permission, but the clerks are not caring for his word. Then the top minister will say, oh, then I will go and finish him. In this way, Prabhupada advised how to get a top minister to help obtain permission. Personally, his silence. He could take a morning walk in silence and then break it. Even more striking was his silent response to something you said. A disciple could ask a question and receive a long silence. A strange-minded woman from Cleveland once went into Prabhupada's room with some of her relatives and sat in his presence for a long time while no one spoke at all. Later, she said that they all thought Prabhupada was doing something mystical, that they weren't supposed to talk, and that he was reciprocating by sitting there and not speaking, although considerable time went by. With his servants, he could travel long distances without talking. Once, on a long flight from Germany to Australia, he was silent and said only a few things. When the plane landed in Australia, Prabhupada said that here in Australia it was green and there in Germany it was green. So how can they say there is no life on the moon and other planets? Some of his comments were surrounded by long silences. Sometimes he would chastise or question us by his silences, which became so intense that we could not bear them. And you could not penetrate his silence. The quality of gravity is defined as follows in the Nectar of Devotion. A person who doesn't express his mind to everyone, or whose mental activity and plan of action are very difficult to understand, is called grave. And he liked quiet in his room. He wouldn't tolerate noises. He would wake his servants to chase dogs when they were howling outside, especially when he was trying to translate in the early morning. And he would send his servants out to track out any odd noises in the building or thereabouts. During his lectures and classes, he would detect the slightest noise and ask that it be stopped. A slamming door broke his heart, he said. And sirens in New York, garbage trucks, dogs. In India, the tapping of the building construction. But he could tolerate it all. For Prabhupada, however, real silence was the fact that he never spoke any nonsense. He would talk unendingly about Krishna, sometimes a foolish guess, would speak some mundane nonsense, and Prabhupada would tolerantly be silent. But it was unnatural to see Prabhupada silent in the presence of another person, because Prabhupada was the one who would be speaking. He had absolute knowledge, and all others should have been silent to let him speak if he desired to speak. He complied with Krishna's wishes and with our wishes that he talk. He spoke from duty, from love, from the preaching spirit. This is a famous statement. Girayo muchu stoyam, vachinna muchu shivam, yatha jnanam ritum kale jnanino dadate nava. During this season, this is a description of the rainy season and autumn in Vrindavan. During this season, the mountains sometimes release their pure water, sometimes did not, just as experts in transcendental science sometimes give the nectar of transcendental knowledge and sometimes do not. So, sometimes an Uttama Vaishnava speaks, sometimes he does not speak. It's dependent on Krishna's will. New American invention. When Srila Prabhupada first went back to India with his American disciples, he sometimes took them on tours of holy places in Vrindavan and Mayapur. One day, Prabhupada was to go with a few disciples in an old American Dodge automobile to visit, not Devnagar, Birnagar, the birthplace of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. Prabhupada rode in the front seat with the driver Shyamsundar Das and about 4 other devotees squeezed into the back seat. They soon discovered, unfortunately, that the old Dodge didn't have a horn. Driving in India without a horn is almost impossible, and the journey was an anticipated 2 hours. Srila Prabhupada was therefore concerned how they will be able to make it. Soon after they had started, however, Prabhupada devised a horn of his own making. He found a metal plate in the car. Then he had the car stop, and the boys got him a stick off the ground. As they rode along, Srila Prabhupada would hold the plate outside the car window and bang on it with a stick whenever there was need of a horn for passing cars or for shooing people and animals from the road. The devotees were amazed and overjoyed at the simple display of Prabhupada's horn, which he continued to operate from the front seat during the whole journey. This will be copied by the Indians, said Srila Prabhupada. They will think that it is a new American invention. They will also get plates and sticks and use them instead of the horn. Sarcastic. Married life, dangerous. As a question. When his godbrother saw that Tejas Das and his wife were sometimes quarreling, they suggested that he should ask Prabhupada to allow him to take sannyas. It was very common during Prabhupada's time. They said it would better enable him to preach. Tejas admittedly thought that his marriage was difficult, and so he resolved to ask Srila Prabhupada at the next opportunity. In those days in India, it was not at all difficult for the devotees to approach Srila Prabhupada in the privacy of his room and ask him such personal questions. Finding Prabhupada alone one evening, Tejas approached him. So, what do you want? Asked Prabhupada in his typically direct manner. I want to take sannyas, Prabhupada, said Tejas. Just at that moment, before Prabhupada gave an answer, his servant brought him his evening prasadam, some vegetables and fruits. Take some prasadam, said Prabhupada. And he put a piece into Tejas' hand. Then Prabhupada gave him more and more until it was falling out of his disciple's hand. Prabhupada put out his other hand and Prabhupada filled that one up also. While Tejas became preoccupied in balancing all the prasadam in his 2 hands, Prabhupada asked, why do you want to take sannyas? For preaching, Prabhupada. But that you are already doing, he said. Prabhupada had commissioned the Tejas Prabhu to set up a center in Delhi. Prabhupada, Tejas said, having family life is full of hindrances. But your wife is a very nice wife, Prabhupada reflected. She is cooperative. She is expert at deity worship. She plays mridanga nicely and harmonium. It's a nice girl. Why do you want to take sannyas? Tejas replied, Prabhupada, because married life is very dangerous. Prabhupada replied, married life dangerous? I don't see any danger. You tell me what is the danger. Tejas could see the drift of Prabhupada's instruction. He thought, if the spiritual master says there is no danger, Tejas no longer felt up to arguing and Prabhupada changed the subject to the practical preaching matters in India. It may seem contradictory to hear Prabhupada stating that there is no danger in married life when often his Bhagavatam purports say the opposite. One can take it that in the Bhagavatam he is describing the Grihimedi life, whereas Krishna conscious Grihastha life is without such dangers. On the other hand, Prabhupada was sometimes very much in favor of a young man's resolve to take sannyas. This may bring up the whole question as to the importance of presenting separate anecdotes as we are doing in Prabhupada Nectar. One may argue that unless we thoroughly know the background of each incident, we cannot know Prabhupada's mind and intent. In this case, did he think that his disciple was not fit for sannyas at that time? Or did he think he was too attached to his wife to attempt renunciation? Or did Prabhupada think that the man's wife was too attached and not ready? Or that it was unnecessary for either husbands or wives preaching at that time? While there are answers to these questions, I do not think the anecdote as it stands is superficial. The points Prabhupada makes to Tejas concur with the Shastric conclusion regarding the real meaning of sannyas as stated in Bhagavad Gita 5.1. Where is that? Anashita karma phalam. 6.1. Meant to be 6.1. Anashita karma phalam karyam karma parodhiya. Aside from that, we get a nice glimpse of Prabhupada reciprocating with the disciple and carefully guiding him, with emphasis on preaching as the real renunciation. Even if we research further into the particular background of each anecdote, when all is said and done, we still cannot know the mind of the Acharya. Even Krishna's Kaviraj sometimes presents the past hymns of Lord Chaitanya and Lord Nityananda and concludes that no one can completely understand the grave meaning of these activities. Let us therefore appreciate and take edification from the accurate renditions of what Prabhupada said and did. And in due course of time, we may realize the meanings more and more. Interested devotees can read about the life of Raghunath Das Goswami from Chaitanya Charitamrita. That will give you some good insight about why bona fide spiritual master speaks in a particular manner to a bona fide disciple at a particular stage in the disciple's spiritual life. Let's go back to Godhead. Starting in the 1970s, India became more and more Prabhupada's home base, and his travels to the West became like tours away from home. While traveling to America in the winter of 1973, Prabhupada caught a cold and tried to get rid of it by moving from Los Angeles to Dallas, which he heard was sunny and warm, but Dallas was also overcast. Prabhupada began talking of returning to Mayapur as the only place where he could be at ease and get well. It would be a long trip back, so he made no definite decision. But one night, about 1 a.m., he walked into the room adjoining his and woke his servant and his secretary. Let's go back home, back to Godhead. Prabhupada said to them while standing in the darkness of their unlit room. His disciples awoke and offered their obeisances at Prabhupada's feet, wondering what he meant. Prabhupada, they asked. Yes, he repeated. I want to go back to Godhead. I want to go to Mayapur. So they returned to Mayapur as soon as possible. Once in Mayapur, the Prabhupada's health recovered. There he was most informal and pleased. In those early days, there was not much building development, and the devotees were undergoing austerities just to live there. The Prabhupada mixed with them freely and in a friendly way. They would walk into his room and sometimes he would walk into theirs. Sometimes even his own servants didn't know exactly where he was at different times of the day. He might be on the roof alone, or sometimes he would walk unaccompanied out to the front row. The devotees at Mayapur couldn't help but appreciate that Prabhupada was special when he was living in the Dham. They felt it was like the informality of Krishna and Gauranga as contrasted to Krishna's opulence in Dwaraka. So Prabhupada in Mayapur was special and informal in that way. Mayapur is the kingdom of God. Naturally, Prabhupada felt like that. We also know that Prabhupada had told devotees in Mayapur, right in his room, in the Lotus building, that if at all there's a place to settle, sometimes we think about settling. We need to settle in a place. That if at all there's a place to settle, that is Mayapur. We leave Mayapur only for the sake of preaching. But otherwise, we want to get back to our home. Vidvan also was Prabhupada's home. There is something called home, in addition to preaching, which is a mission for others' benefit. There is something called home. That is Mayapur, Vidvan, and so on. Little drops of nectar. Madhudvisha Das had been the president in Bombay ISKCON, but to Prabhupada, he expressed his dissatisfaction, particularly in working with the Indians. He wanted another preaching field. He said that he considered the Indians to be very sneaky and tricky, and that he didn't like dealing with them. Prabhupada said, I'm an Indian. Do you think I'm very tricky? No, not you, Srila Prabhupada, said Madhu Guruji. Actually, I am tricky, said Srila Prabhupada, because I have tricked all of you into surrendering to Krishna, and now you are caught and you cannot get away. Panchitravida Swami endured a serious bout of boils in India. The doctor said that he had come close to dying and he had had to perform surgery on his back. When Panchitravida described his diseased condition to Srila Prabhupada, Prabhupada looked at him and said, "These diseases are simply imaginary." "No, Srila Prabhupada, I really have them," said Panchitravida. He thought that Prabhupada was saying that the boils were all in his mind. He therefore showed Prabhupada the big scar he had on his back from the surgery. Prabhupada touched the scar with his finger and said nothing further. Soon after that, in the Bhagavatam class, Srila Prabhupada was describing how the sufferings of all living entities are imaginary, created by identification with the material body. Hearing this, Panchitravida realized the import of Srila Prabhupada's previous words. Yes, in the absolute sense, even the attack of boils was imaginary. Srila Prabhupada sometimes traveled throughout India by train, accompanied by his disciples. On one occasion, the train stopped in a field full of purple flowers. One of the devotees climbed down, ran into the field, picked some flowers, and ran back to Prabhupada's car just as the train started to leave. Then the devotees brought Prabhupada a bouquet of purple flowers as an offering of devotion. Prabhupada calmly accepted them, but said, "Lord Shiva wears these flowers." The devotees were worried that they had made some Guru Aparadha, but Prabhupada smiled and stuck one flower behind each of his ears. He widened his eyes and made a large grin, see, playing as if he were Lord Shiva with purple flowers in his hair. Prabhupada said, on book production and distribution, some of Prabhupada's well-known maxims stress the value of his books and the necessity to print them with the greatest care. If there are any mistakes in my books, then the books will not be taken seriously. Every word in these books is like a document, and therefore the editor shouldn't be careless or speculate. These purports are my devotional ecstasies. Prabhupada's first books were printed by devotees at ISKCON Press, but they weren't expertly done. When Prabhupada received the first copy of one paperback edition of a Bhagavatam chapter, he opened it, and the binding fell apart in his hands. To the devotees who saw this, he asked, "What will it take for my disciples to learn how to print these books so that they will not fall apart?" Brahmananda replied, "Sincerity. Prabhupada, if we were more sincere, then we could do it." Prabhupada looked down at the broken book in his hand and said, "No." The assembled devotees were surprised. One of them asked, "Not sincerity?" "Sincerity, yes," said Prabhupada, "plus intelligence." Here at Mayapur, my Guru Maharaj was printing one paper. It was selling for only a few paisa. Sometimes, whenever one brahmachari would go to Navadip and sell even a few copies, I would see my Guru Maharaj become very much pleased. So I am always emphasizing book distribution. It is the better kirtan. It is better than chanting. Chanting here meaning singing in the streets. Of course, chanting should not stop, but book distribution is the best kirtan. Harinam Sankirtan, Nagar Kirtan. It should not stop, but book distribution is greater than that. It is Brihat Kirtan. And then Nagar Sankirtan is Laghu Kirtan. Once, on speaking to a gathering of book distributors, Srila Prabhupada explained to them how Bhaktivinoda Thakur had wanted a temple built in Mayapur. "You will be the cornerstones," said Prabhupada to his book distributors. He said that by their distributing books, the temple would be built. Oh, POEP is due to book distribution. "You are so ugly, you should marry a monkey." When Srila Prabhupada's edition of Chaitanya Charitamrita Madhya Leela Volume 1 was first published, devotees were surprised and pleased to read about the humorous joking between Lord Nityananda and Advaita Acharya during the taking of prasadam at Advaita Acharya's house. One morning, during a car ride with Srila Prabhupada, one of the devotees expressed his appreciation for the new volume. There is such nice humor in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Srila Prabhupada. Yes, said Srila Prabhupada, spiritual life is humor also. Then he began to tell a story. Krishna said to one old lady, "You're so ugly, you should marry a monkey." "No," said the old lady, "I've given up all material desires. I will marry you, Krishna." "Yes, yes, yes," all the gopis and boys clapped and laughed. While Prabhupada said this, his eyes lit up and he became animated, laughing at the humorous pastimes of Krishna. So Krishna was defeated, said Prabhupada, by that laughing of the gopis. The spiritual world is far more interesting than anything we can come up in material existence. One who has intelligence, has strength. In a lecture, Prabhupada remarked that foolish people often criticize devotees as do-nothings and weaklings. During Prabhupada's time, the devotees referred to temple resident devotees. So people would say, "What is this? You're just living in a temple and simply singing something in the morning and something in the evening. What is this? What do you guys should do something. You should get a job." People often criticize devotees as do-nothings and weaklings, but such people do not understand the intelligence of a devotee. Therefore, a devotee does not have to heed such people. To illustrate the point, Srila Prabhupada told a story. Some laborers were criticizing the minister of the king, claiming that he only sat around and did no work. The king reminded them that it took intelligence to become a minister. He said he would give everyone a test, including the minister. Whoever could pass the test would become the next minister. The king said, "Take this big elephant, weigh him, and let me know the exact weight." The ordinary men were baffled. Where was there a scale for weighing an elephant? They could not do anything. They came back to the king with no information. Then the king turned to his minister and asked, "Will you kindly weigh this elephant?" In 6 minutes, he came back and reported, "It is 20 mounds, 1,930 pounds. The other men were standing open-mouthed in surprise. "Who's that?" they asked. Within 6 minutes, he came back and he gave the exact weight. The king asked, "How did you weigh him? Did you get some very big scale?" "No, sir," replied the minister. "It is not possible to weigh the elephant on a scale. It is very difficult." "Then how did you weigh it?" "I took it on a boat. When I got him on the boat, then I saw the watermark and I marked it. Then after getting the elephant off the boat, I added weight onto the boat. And when it came to the same watermark, then I understood." So the king addressed the laborers and questioned them. "Now you see the difference?" They agreed, "Yes." After telling the story, Prabhupada quoted from scripture, "Buddhiryasya balam," not balam, "Buddhiryasya balam tasya nirbuddhestu kuto balam." One who has got intelligence, he has strength. One who has no intelligence, a rascal, has no strength. Prabhupada concluded, scientists, atheists, and different critics of devotees are like that, rascals, fools. We don't take advice from them. We take advice from Krishna, or his representative, who repeats Krishna's words verifiably. Personally, evening massage was not as thorough as the pre-noon one. This massages legs, squeeze them up and down from the knee down to the feet. Then the feet and toes also. He taught the technique. He said it gave some relief. At these times, he was prone to sweet reflections. Was he sleeping? Sometimes. Or he would speak something. The servant might have to stay up a considerable while. Usually, it was in a darkened room. In Australia, at the end of the day, after he and the devotees had marched a great distance in the Rath Yatra parade, Prabhupada complimented his servant on his dancing so nicely in the parade. It was also during a night massage that he told another servant the story of how he got a special pair of shoes as a child from England, a gift from his father. Also, he would bring up the philosophy and the inability of mudras to take to it. To us, Prabhupada was a mystical ocean. His utterances were not coming by our dictation. Yet, we were also as close as possible, right by his side, touching his body, connected by speech. So he was tangibly with us. And yet he was like a mystical ocean. And his purity created an aloofness for those who were still impure. One didn't even dare to think, what is Prabhupada thinking? In the dark room, during the evening massage, the servant used to want to take a rest. Now he may consider what a fool he was. If he had another chance, would he be the same fool? No one likes to be the servant. We want to be the master. But Prabhupada kept us in check. He made us devotees. Separation. One morning in Berkeley, Prabhupada was walking on the university campus. Sannyasi disciples and others were there. And also Krishnadas Adhikari. Krishnadas had left the movement and grown long hair, but they had recently shown a revival of interest and was now walking with Prabhupada. His questions were full of his various doubts. At the very end of the walk, somehow, the topic of feeling separation from the spiritual master came up. Krishnadas asked, "You must always be feeling separation from your spiritual master." He was hoping to prompt Srila Prabhupada to talk about his feelings of separation from Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. Srila Prabhupada was silent. Krishnadas asked the question again. "I suppose you must always be feeling separation from your spiritual master." Prabhupada then answered, "That you do not require." In other words, it's none of your business to ask. Then he got in his car and left. What is ISKCON? When Srila Prabhupada visited Hawaii, he had to deal with controversial persons who claimed to be his followers and yet denounced the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. Prabhupada wanted to encourage everyone to go on chanting Hare Krishna. Yet at the same time, he wanted to clearly establish that a sincere follower works within ISKCON. The questions and answers after his lectures in Hawaii often dealt with these matters. What is ISKCON? Asked a long-haired beach boy wearing a japa bead bag. ISKCON? Srila Prabhupada replied, "It's a simple thing. You do not know." Then he described what each letter in the acronym ISKCON stood for. We have a worldwide society, so we say international. "Well, are you ISKCON?" the boy asked. This was a loaded question. The devotees had been preaching that Srila Prabhupada was ISKCON because one cannot refuse service to ISKCON and yet claim to serve Srila Prabhupada. But the anti-ISKCON party had argued that Srila Prabhupada and ISKCON were different. Prabhupada was pure and transcendental. ISKCON was corrupt, a mere organization. The Prabhupada started to laugh. "I'm not ISKCON," he said. "I'm a member of ISKCON." Then he looked at his disciple who was the GBC secretary for Hawaii. Prabhupada pointed to him and said, "He's a member of ISKCON." Then he pointed to the ISKCON Hawaii temple president. "He is a member of ISKCON. We are all members of ISKCON, the International Society for Krishna Consciousness." Almost everyone present cried out, "Jai!" Then Srila Prabhupada looked back smiling. There was no further challenge to his perfect, humble reply. Shivaram Maharaj once said, "It is the duty of every member of ISKCON to make ISKCON the ISKCON that Prabhupada wanted." And for that, all of us have to agree to, first of all, carry out Prabhupada's instructions relevant to our own lives. Then we can help others. But I am so small. In Bombay, devotees were able to freely see the Prabhupada and ask their questions. But Panchatravidya Swami sensed that as the movement grew, he might not be able to maintain such an intimate relationship with the spiritual master. One day, he entered Srila Prabhupada's apartment and revealed his doubt. "I don't understand," Panchatravidya said. "ISKCON is such a big society. How can I understand that I have a personal relationship with you? If I'm somewhere halfway around the world, and I am, for instance, sweeping or washing a floor in a temple, how can I know that I'm serving you personally?" Yes, ISKCON is so big, Prabhupada answered, but I am so small. Panchit Dravida immediately felt satisfied. But Srila Prabhupada explained it further. You speak of serving in the temple somewhere, said Prabhupada. But actually, you don't have to do anything. I am responsible directly. I have to maintain all the temples, see that the floors are swept, the pots washed, and that everything is clean in all these ISKCON temples all over the world. But I cannot do it all by myself. It is like an arati ceremony. I may be offering the arati, but I ask you, please hand me the fan so I can offer it to Radha Krishna. In the same way, I am asking you to help me in the temple, the preaching or sweeping the floor. You understand? So the idea is that it's Prabhupada's offering to Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. And the devotees during Prabhupada's time, they clearly understood that. They understood that they were supposed to simply carry out his instructions and that he was doing the preaching and that they were just functioning according to his instructions, his directions. It's not that they were preaching on their own. He was preaching. They were preaching Prabhupada's teachings. They're not preaching their own realizations. Just like that. They were preaching their realizations that were in line with Prabhupada's teachings. Not their own realizations which don't match Prabhupada's teachings. Little drops of nectar. In Hyderabad, after a Mandala lecture program, a teenaged Indian boy spent the night with the devotees. The next morning, he entered Srila Prabhupada's room along with the initiated devotees and sat down close to Prabhupada. As soon as Prabhupada saw the boy, he pointed to the door without saying a word. The boy also said nothing, but got up and left. Srila Prabhupada then turned to one of the sannyasis and said, first, he must wash all the pots. He explained that Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur had always first tested the sincerity of someone who wanted to join by asking him to wash pots. And typically, the time when I and others, we joined ISKCON in late 80s, 90s, and so on, even before that, was standard. When you joined an ISKCON center to become a brahmachari, the first set of services you got was to wash the pots, clean the floor, all these menial services. Various services of this nature. And that is very, very important. And I can see, not just myself, there are others also who can see that when you bring in devotees by preaching, but you don't put them through these kind of services, then over time they don't become mature, nor are they able to handle the various requests for services that come up later on. We were trained to do everything, all kinds of things, from doing Xerox, running around, everything. That's it. This is a very, very valuable experience, even from the perspective of leadership development. It's important that a leader has full experience of whatever the followers are meant to be doing. Otherwise, you will be sitting in the ivory tower and have no idea about the ease or difficulties experienced by the people under you. Very dangerous. In Japan, Prabhupada rode the monorail. At first, the seat in front of him was empty. Gurujan Das invited Prabhupada to put his feet up there, since the seats were uncomfortably cramped. The empty seat was actually reserved for one of Prabhupada's disciples, Bhanu Das, and the monorail authorities finally insisted that everyone must sit in his own seat. Gurujan then again turned to Srila Prabhupada, this time with trepidation, fear. Srila Prabhupada, one of the devotees, has to sit down. Will you remove your lotus feet? Yes, Srila Prabhupada replied. I will move my feet so that the lotus-like devotee can sit down. Shatadanya Maharaj was talking with Srila Prabhupada in his room in Maya. And he discovered that ants were crawling over Prabhupada's desk. Chaitanya stood and began pushing away the ants with light, brushing motions of his cloth. Peacefully sitting back against a bolstered pillow, Prabhupada watched and commented, "Before you would have killed them, but now you are purified. Now you become non-violent." Prabhupada said, on money. One time on a walk, Prabhupada was explaining how the paper currency is a cheating process. He said that the government encourages people to work hard in the factories to develop the economy of the nation, and yet they pay them only pieces of paper. When the government doesn't have enough pieces of paper, they print up more, and thus the whole economy is based on cheating. Prabhupada said that the Vedic economy is based on the bartering system. If the bartering system is not possible, then at least the gold standard should be used, because the gold has some value and the quantity of gold is limited. After hearing Prabhupada describe the ideal economy based on the Vedic civilization, one devotee asked, but if all transactions are done in gold, it would be very difficult to make large deals, because to carry the gold and exchange it would be very cumbersome. That's very good, replied Prabhupada. Why should there be big transactions? Big transactions means that people are accumulating more than they require. We don't want big transactions. We want each person to have what they require, not more. That's the idea. Prabhupada told a proverb about money. One man asked another, "Are you intelligent?" The second man started to look in his pockets. The first man asked, "Why are you looking in your pockets?" The second man said, "Well, if there's any money there, that means I'm intelligent." Prabhupada explained, actually in our movement, everything is going on by my intelligence and your cooperation. So you're preaching very intelligently. But if there is not money, then where is the intelligence? Prabhupada instructed that 50% of income should go to the book fund, and 50% should go to construction or other projects. He said that the Krishna consciousness movement was in one sense just like a business, and so it should be run in that way. In other words, it was on the basis of its books that the movement was getting its collections, whether by life membership or book sales. Therefore, just as in any business, the capital assets had to be invested in. You must therefore give 50% of your money to the book fund. The meaning, when an ISKCON temple gets money, what to do with that money? This is about that. We should live on a paltry income, whatever we receive by selling our magazines, but in dire necessity, when there is no other way, we may accept some service temporarily. But on principle, we should go on Sankirtan, book distribution, not work. So whatever Krishna gives us, we should accept on that principle. You are a senior member of the society, you should have known all these things. Anyway, send them back on Sankirtan. All the Amsterdam devotees should be engaged in Sankirtan, not in a cigarette factory. Prabhupada approved of his disciples making ambitious plans for spreading Krishna consciousness. But Prabhupada, one devotee asked, how are we going to get the money to do all this? Prabhupada said, you make the plans, Krishna will provide the money. And this is a simple fact. If you want to carry out Prabhupada's instructions, and you want to carry out the instructions of the predecessor acharyas, and you take one step, you will notice that Krishna will arrange for the finances for that. Concerning Ganesh worship, it is not actually necessary for us. But if someone has a sentiment for getting the blessings of Ganesh to get large amounts of money for Krishna's service, then it is all right. But anyone who takes up this kind of worship must send me at least $100,000 monthly, not less. If he cannot send this amount, he cannot do Ganesh worship. Prabhupada was not keen on banking money. As soon as there will be money in the bank, he said there will be headache, this tax, that tax. You can't try to avoid taxes. It's illegal. Prabhupada was, okay. Prabhupada said, we have no problems. Although we have so much money, if we had to lose that money, still we would not be hampered in our mission. Ahaitutya pratihata. Without being checked. Krishna consciousness is prosecuted in pure devotion. Yes, one of the devotees agreed. Even if we had to write the books out by hand and distribute them. "15 minutes. Devotees want to decrease the fever. In Australia, Prabhupada was waiting in an airport terminal for a delayed flight. He asked Amogadas to go to the desk to find out the departure time. The desk clerk answered that the new boarding time would be in 15 minutes. 15 minutes late. Prabhupada heard this, but after 20 minutes, when there was no call, he asked the devotees to check again. Again, the report was 15 minutes. Prabhupada kept looking at his watch every 15 minutes and asking the devotees to find out more information. After some time, Prabhupada told a story. He said that a man once testified in a court case that he had been 50 years old for the last 15 years. And he claimed that due to honesty, he had not wished to change his statement. So Srila Prabhupada said, still they say 15 minutes to boarding time. That is honesty. It is 1 hour and 15 minutes late. And still they do not change their word. 15 minutes. One of Prabhupada's Bengali stories was about a doctor visiting a house to diagnose 2 patients, a rich housewife and her maidservant. The doctor said, the maidservant's fever is 105 degrees. So there is some anxiety. I will give her some medicine. But the landlady of the house has practically no fever, 99 degrees. So there is no anxiety for her. When she heard this, the landlady became angry and said, this doctor is useless. I am the landlady. I have only got 99 degrees and my maidservant has 105. The maidservant should have 98 and I should have 110. Prabhupada compared this to the modern civilization, which is inclined to increase the degree of its fever up to 110. As in the human body, that is death. As soon as the temperature reaches 107. So Prabhupada said that by the nuclear weapons, modern civilization will come to the point of 107 and over. But the devotees want to decrease the fever by living the highest ideal life and by decreasing the demands of the body. In fact, this is certainly a funny story, but the desire to increase our dhanam, janam, sundarim, kavitam, and so on, it is actually like this. It is just strange and funny for a genuine spiritualist. It is just a joke. Just a joke. High Court judge, yes, purchased Mercedes. The Prabhupada said that many of his godbrothers were envious of his success in preaching. He did not like to point it out, but he wanted his disciples to be aware of the nature of criticisms his godbrothers would make to belittle the work of ISKCON. They cannot do anything themselves, said Srila Prabhupada. And if somebody does something, they will be envious. That is the nature of a third-class man. To illustrate, Prabhupada told a story he had heard from his spiritual master. One man informed another that a man known to them had become the High Court judge. Oh no, said the second man. No, that cannot be right. Yes, he's now a judge, said the first friend. I've seen him sitting on the bench. The second man replied, maybe, but I don't think he's getting any salary. Prabhupada said, such envious men will find out some fault anywhere. Even if there's no fault, actually, they will manufacture some fault. That is their business. Prabhupada said that many persons were envious of his Guru Maharaj, but Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati did not care for him. For years in India, Srila Prabhupada had traveled in dilapidated autos, broken autos. He often had to borrow cars. But as his movement grew, he felt it was not right. We are spending crores of rupees to finish this Bombay construction, he said, but whenever I arrive at the airport, I'm picked up in a borrowed car. What kind of impression is it to the life members that we always have to approach them to borrow their car? For years, the car was discussed and contemplated, but it never appeared. Later, Prabhupada received a letter from a disciple in Europe who said that he would purchase a Mercedes for Prabhupada in Germany and drive it to India. Prabhupada sent him a telegram. Yes, purchase Mercedes. At that time, the devotees with Prabhupada in India said that they had heard the devotee was going to purchase the car with money from Prabhupada's book fund. Prabhupada said this was like a famous story. A guru went to his disciple's home and was greeted very elaborately. When he inquired how it was possible for his disciple to make such nice arrangements, the disciple told him, Gurudev, everything belongs to you. Later, the guru saw that he had no money left in his own bank account, and he could understand that the disciple had spent all of his guru's money. Prabhupada ordered that his disciple should not purchase a car for him with money from the book fund and then claim, Prabhupada, everything belongs to you. More short stories. In Bengali, there is a saying, if you can walk on your hands, do it. But whatever you do, change. Prabhupada told this to illustrate his dislike for whimsical changes. He was especially anxious that after his departure, his followers might take a free hand with his books or the deity worship and make unnecessary, unauthorized changes. There was a story about the expert craftsmanship of a plasterer who worked on the construction of the Taj Mahal. One of the top directors of the construction was inspecting the building in progress and noticed for 3 days in a row a certain plasterer who was sitting in the same place mixing plaster. On the third day, the inspector became angry and said, why are you simply sitting and mixing this plaster? You're so lazy. The man who was mixing the plaster also became very angry and he threw a handful of his plaster at the inspector. The plaster missed the inspector but landed on a wall. The plaster was so well mixed, however, so solid and hard that no one could get it off the wall. It is still there today. Prabhupada told this story to stress the importance of good craftsmanship and of doing everything nicely in Krishna's service. There is sometimes this misconception that because Krishna is Bhavagrahi Janardana, Krishna accepts our attitude. Therefore, we can be substandard in many ways. If we want to cook, we need to get a devotee cook in good standing and who's really good in cooking. Because we need to offer the best. Same way, we want to decorate a temple, decorate it nicely. Not get some person who's got a lousy sense of interior design, or practically zero sense of interior design. You get him to decorate, so-called decorate. Not like that. Do it nicely. Do it properly. Do it nicely. And don't simply just keep saying that, oh no, but Krishna sees the attitude. Want to sing for Krishna? Get a devotee in good standing. Sings nicely. Make him sing. Or the deities. One of Prabhupada's disciple secretaries knew some Hindi and wrote out a letter that Prabhupada had dictated. But the devotee apologized. My handwriting is not very good. It doesn't matter, said Srila Prabhupada. No one can write Hindi nicely. Then Prabhupada told a joke. Someone wrote a letter to a friend in Hindi. The man replied, next time you write a letter in Hindi, please send train fare to go to your place. The friend wrote back, why is that? The other friend replied, because I have to go to you to decide for your letters. Personal, drinking water. Once after silently demonstrating his technique of drinking water, Prabhupada said to a boy who was present, you cannot do that. One reason for drinking in that manner was cleanliness. One's lip or mouth doesn't touch the edge of the drinking vessel. Prabhupada would pour the water down, swallowing, and then tilting the chalice upright, stop the flow of water without spilling a drop. In India, the water would be kept cool in big clay jugs. In the West, water was served with ice sometimes. Once, when Prabhupada asked for water, his servant asked, "Do you want cold water?" Prabhupada replied, "Water means cold water." And water must be covered. In India, to leave a clay jug of water uncovered is, he said, signing your death warrant. In the West, the pitcher also should be covered. He could appreciate different tastes of water. We would make efforts to get him the best water from special sources like Bhagatji's well in Vrindavan. He would drink quite a bit of water for health and digestion. He would make comments about it as we sat with him in his room, watching him drink water. But don't draw his water from a bathroom. Pradyumna Das asked how it is actually different if the water comes from the bathroom, provided one doesn't know where the water comes from. Prabhupada replied that it would affect the mind, even if you didn't know where the water came from, because the bathroom is a contaminated place. There are specific things which are contaminated. There are specific things which are sanctified. This arrangement is there in the universe. So it is wise to learn about these things. The 11th canto of the Bhagavatam, Lord Krishna, while talking to Uddhava, points out which things are in Tamoguna, which things are in, he gives a sample, which things are in Tamoguna, which things are in Rajoguna, which things are in Sattoguna, which things are fully transcendental. Only a disciple could know how sweet it was to talk about these apparently mundane things. To confer with Prabhupada about his needs or to talk about water was relief from greater problems. One thought, let me stay here and supply Prabhupada water so he can preach and write books. Nothing else is as important as his water, his health, his daily Bhagavatam work, his being pleased. Nothing is as nice as to see his drinking as the water falls from the cup to his mouth. All right, that is for you. When Srila Prabhupada was about to leave Los Angeles for a world tour in 1976, he called some of his devotees to his room. Open my Almira. He said to Rameshwar Swami, who opened the metal locker containing Srila Prabhupada's clothes. Do you see those kurtas? He said, Prabhupada. Pick one. Rameshwar Swami picked out a bright orange one. You like that one? Prabhupada asked. Yes. All right, that is for you. Rameshwar was overwhelmed to receive the treasure of a remnant of Prabhupada's clothes. Other devotees also received clothes and gifts from Prabhupada's hand. Then it was almost time for him to go to the airport. With graceful artistry, Prabhupada sat at his desk and applied the Vaishnava tilak to his forehead. Rameshwar Swami thought to himself that everything about Prabhupada, the way he sat or walked, the way he dressed, and the way he put on his tilak, was all majestic and opulent. As Prabhupada stood to leave the room, Rameshwar voiced his appreciation. Prabhupada, you appear to us to be just like a king. I am much more than any king, said Prabhupada. And he walked downstairs. And then he walked downstairs. There he was met by 100 devotees who accompanied him to the airport as he began another world tour. Who has done this? A few months before Srila Prabhupada's first visit to ISKCON Dallas, a strong windstorm hit the area, felling trees. A tall, valuable shade tree in the courtyard of the temple also fell over and remained leaning against an adjoining building, the children's prasadam hall. The tree still had its roots in the ground, but its heavy weight with dangling branches now lay in a sharp angle right across the walkway, leaving barely enough room to walk under it. Satsurup Das, the temple president, took no immediate action. But different devotees approached him and said that the tree had to be removed right away or it might cause collapse of the building. it was leaning against. Satsarup agreed. And one of the devotees climbed the tall tree with a power saw and gradually dismantled the upper branches and trunk until nothing remained but the lower 10 feet of tilted trunk. Thus the tree appeared when Srila Prabhupada came there in September 1972. As soon as he walked into the courtyard accompanied by temple leaders and trailed by the whole assembly of Gurukul children and teachers, Prabhupada saw the remains of the big tree and his face expressed trouble. He walked off the cement path and went up to the tree, and so did everyone else behind. Who has done this? He demanded. Satsarup admitted responsibility and explained the reason the tree had been destroyed. Prabhupada shook his head angrily. That was no reason to kill it, he said. Satsarup tried to explain the dangerous condition and pointed to the dent in the roof of the building. He also said that the fallen tree would probably have died, would have soon died. No, it is not dead, Prabhupada challenged. Look, that's a green twig growing out of it. Prabhupada walked away, disgusted, and the devotees remained shocked at what they now saw as a brutal, unnecessary act. In his room, Prabhupada continued to criticize the killing of the tree. He said this was the typical American attitude. When something is wrong, immediately cut it down and destroy it, with no understanding or compassion for the presence of the soul. Later, feeling repentant, Satsarup asked if he had committed an offense. Not offense, said Srila Prabhupada. You are ignorant. Where are the vases? In an attempt to make Srila Prabhupada's quarters in Los Angeles attractive and pleasing for him, the woman used to change his vases daily, putting in abundant fresh flowers. One day, Srila Prabhupada entered from his morning walk and noticed that the flower vases were missing. Where are the vases? He asked. The servant replied that the woman had probably taken them to put in fresh flowers. The flowers in it were fine, he said. Then he began complaining. Why do they change these flowers every day? Why are they so wasteful? Who is doing this? Tell them to change them only when they go bad. That is the vase. Go find it immediately. Prabhupada's servant went down to the kitchen and found the girls changing the flowers. You'd better stop changing these flowers every day, he said. Prabhupada doesn't want it. Make sure the vase is never out of his room. When his servant returned to the room with the vase of flowers, Prabhupada continued on the same thing. Just do it when there is necessary. When it is necessary, he said. Shouldn't waste so much on flowers. This is your custom in America, simply wasting. If you have some extra cloth, you cannot fold it. You cut it and throw it away. Whatever goes wrong, you solve it with money and it appears good. You make some accident and you cover it quickly with money. It is not that you are very capable, but with money you can cover your deficiencies. The psychologist. Giriraj Das had been serving Srila Prabhupada in Bombay for quite a few years when he finally returned for a visit to the United States to recover his health and to see his parents in Chicago. When he returned again to Bombay, Prabhupada inquired about his health and his visit to his parents' home. Giriraj described how during the 2-day visit with his family, his father had invited a friend who was a psychologist to have a talk with Giriraj. A psychologist, a woman, had begun asking Giriraj whether he felt that in his childhood there was any lack in his relationship with his parents. Giriraj had replied on the basis of the Bhagavad Gita, that actually each of us had passed through many bodies in many different lifetimes. And in each lifetime we had different parents, but our real father is Krishna. The psychologist had kept trying to speak to him on the psychological level, but Giriraj had kept replying to her on the spiritual platform. So it was very difficult for her to make progress in her analysis. After she left the room, Giriraj had overheard her speaking to his parents in the hallway, saying that as far as she could see, There was nothing more she could do. Yes, Prabhupada replied. They called her so she could try to cure you, but actually your disease is incurable. You can never go back. Hearing these words from a spiritual master, Giriraj became engladdened. I have my Bhagavad Gita. An elderly Indian gentleman who visited Prabhupada in his room became gradually critical of Srila Prabhupada's preaching. Swamiji, the man said, you should not criticize so many persons. You should see everyone equally. The Bhagavad Gita says, Pandita Samadarshinaha. You should see everybody equally. Prabhupada replied, that is a higher stage. I'm not on that stage. I distinguish. On the higher stage, you don't distinguish between pious activity and sinful activity. But I distinguish. You say, you're sinning. You should stop. As the discussion continued, Prabhupada kept referring to the previous acharyas in order to support his viewpoint. I have my Bhagavad Gita, said Prabhupada. I have my acharyas. I stand on their authority. Pursuing the argument, Prabhupada's visitor said, what have you done beyond that? You are just repeating what they've done. What have you done? Prabhupada replied, I have not done anything. I'm simply repeating. So my contribution is that I've made this knowledge available to all people all over the world without discrimination. I've given Krishna consciousness to everyone. That is my contribution. That is my version of Pandita Samadarshana. Prabhupada concluded the interview with those words, and the man expressed gratefulness. Later in the hall, while leaving, the man was remarking out loud to himself. Very interesting. He sees everyone equally. Then more little drops of nectar. Bhavananda Goswami had been a professional decorator before meeting Srila Prabhupada. So Prabhupada engaged him in that propensity by asking him to decorate the altar for the first Radha Krishna deities in America. Bhavananda had just completed his work and was going down before the forms of Radha and Krishna when Srila Prabhupada entered the room. Oh, very nice, Prabhupada said. Who has done this? I have, Srila Prabhupada, Bhavananda replied. Yes, said Srila Prabhupada. You can decorate the naked dancing club and go to hell, or you can decorate the temple and go back to Vaikuntha. Prabhupada did not take on this idea that we should not use our talents to serve Krishna. There are some who think like that. They think we are supposed to serve Krishna's devotees with humility, with this, with that, but don't utilize your talent and so on. However, Prabhupada actually, he encouraged the opposite. He said, no, we are supposed to utilize all of these things in the service of spiritual master and the Vaishnavas. When Srila Prabhupada stayed in Los Angeles, a 2-year-old boy named Bhakta Vishwareta became very attached to him, and Prabhupada showed him special mercy. Bhakta Vishwareta used to crawl up the stairs and into Prabhupada's room without knocking. He would sit with his back straight before Prabhupada. And when Prabhupada gave him some prasadam, he would not eat it until Prabhupada asked him to do so. Definitely he appears to have been an advanced soul. Prabhupada was very pleased that at such a young age, the boy could chant japa, recite verses, and sing and dance in kirtan. When Bhakta Vishwareta was 5 years old, Prabhupada asked his parents to send him to the Gurukula in Dallas. Prabhupada had set up a Gurukula in Dallas. Prabhupada writes about it in his Nectar of Instruction. Purpose. The idea is that they should be able to progress in Krishna consciousness continuously. Then one time when Prabhupada visited Dallas, he again met with Bhakta Vishwareta, and it was like the reunion of two friends. Yet this time, Bhakta Vishwareta was extremely shy. He wouldn't bow down or say or do anything in Prabhupada's presence. He just stood there, looking down. Prabhupada began to pinch him in several places and tugged at his shikha, but the boy wouldn't respond. Then Prabhupada finally asked him whether he would like a sweet ball. Bhakta Vishwareta nodded his head. He must be 3 years old now. Nodded his head, yes. Prabhupada had his servant get one, and they gave it to him. When he took it and immediately ate it, Prabhupada smiled and said, he's a devotee of prasadam. Prabhupada said on the origin of the living entity. The next question is about the living entity falling down in this material world and not from the impersonal Brahman. Existence in the impersonal Brahman is also within the category of non-Krishna consciousness. Those who are in the Brahman effulgence are also in a fallen condition. So there's no question of falling down from a fallen condition. When fall takes place, it means falling down from the non-fallen condition. The non-fallen condition is Krishna consciousness. So long as one can maintain pure Krishna consciousness, he is not fallen. As soon as he is out of Krishna consciousness, he is fallen down. It does not matter where a living entity stays. In the material world also, there are different stages of living conditions. And to remain in the Brahman effulgence is also another phase of that fallen condition. Just like in the Bhagavad Gita, it is stated that every conditioned soul by their activities. Conditioned soul by their pious activities are elevated to the higher planetary system. But as soon as their stock of pious activities is finished, they again come down to the earthly planet. Similarly, those who are elevated beyond the planetary systems to the Brahman effulgence, they are also prone to fall down as much as the living entity from a higher planetary system. Straight from a letter. Personal. This wearing a hat and other striking casual poses and attitudes. Sometimes Srila Prabhupada would wear a Swami hat at a comical angle with the flaps sticking out on either side of his head. Sometimes he would lie with his body draped across his sitting place, feet and legs hanging over the bolster pillows, completely relaxed. Sometimes he would transparently doze in a sitting position in his room. Of course, he did not behave so casually when guests were there. His walk with his cane was aristocratic, as was the tilt of his head. Everyone received him as a refined gentleman. He was usually seen in public with a large entourage, often when he was alone, or at least in smaller groups. The casual and graceful poses of his body, sitting or walking, his movements in holding a chalice of water, the pinky extended, a mudra signifying perfection, the silk cuff of his sleeve showing under his sweater, and then the silk cuff of his sleeve showing under his sweater, and then the soft, smooth-lined palms of his hands displayed while talking. All these charmed and pacified the heart. Sometimes Prabhupada would be preaching at length and then suddenly stand up and walk out of the room while everyone waited for his return. On his exit and on his re-entry, everyone would bow down. These small, pleasurable aspects of his presence were a background to the serious business of life with Srila Prabhupada. Prabhupada was stern and grave, always talking about immediate plans, heavy surrenders that he asked of his disciples. Yet the steady joy of being with Prabhupada was always there. Both were there. The joys of being near this person and the heaviness of his aura. In his presence, Krishna's protection was always there. This is a transparent Vaimedya. Siddha Vaishnava and Uttama Vaishnava is a transparent Vaimedya. So therefore, one always, any receptive disciple would experience Krishna's protection in Prabhupada's presence. Service and separation. Our meeting and separation in the material world is like the flowing tide of the water. During the flowing tide of the river, during the flowing tide of the river, so many different floating articles meet together, and with the flowing, they again become separated by the movement of the waves. That is exactly the way of material life. But our separation, although it resembles exactly the material way, is completely different. In the spiritual world, separation is more relishable than meeting. In other words, in spiritual life, there is no separation. Separation is eternal. Meeting is also eternal. Separation is simply another feature of meeting. The fact that Prabhupada had the potency to empower young boys and girls to go all over the world and establish this movement is a transcendental reality. That was his glory. And the people who were not physically with Prabhupada, they were having just as intense and sometimes more intense experiences. Prabhupada was sometimes more intensely present in those places. For instance, when Prabhupada's disciples were working on the Chaitanya Charitamrita, within 2 months, they completed 17 volumes, producing 17 volumes. I am involved in publication and I'm somewhat aware of the production process. 17 volumes is not a joke. To produce 17 volumes in 2 months is definitely, it's just, unless God wills, we don't do things like that easily. But devotees, they experienced, they had very strong experience of Krishna consciousness at that time. The reality of Prabhupada's appearance on the earth is even today expanding. It's not that he is a material person. That's the whole point. Prabhupada was not a human being confined only to wherever he was personally present. His personal presence was special. And those were special pastimes. But practically, Prabhupada was like the sun. He expanded his potency everywhere, and he's still doing so. Prabhupada is the Jagat Guru who expands himself all over the world and is continuing to expand himself into the hearts of everyone. That is stated in the Bhagavatam, in the case of Sutta Goswami. Tam sarva bhuta hritayam muniman adosmi. Sutta said about his Guru Shuka, I offer my obeisances to my spiritual master who enters into the heart of everyone. And similarly, Vyasadeva glorified his Guru Narada by saying, you're just like the sun. You go everywhere, exactly like the sun, all over the universe. So Vyasadeva said, Antaschara, you actually enter within everything. And Vayu, you're just like the wind. Just as the air goes inside your body and also outside your body. So he said, my spiritual master can go inside and outside of everything. So it should be understood that Prabhupada actually was and is expanding himself all over the whole universe. Someone who takes the Bhaktivedanta book trust very seriously, they consider that to be their relationship with Prabhupada. I consider that I was his personal servant for helping to manifest his books as quickly as possible. Devamrita Maharaj made the statement. He was the last production manager for the BBT, the book production manager, English book production manager during Prabhupada's time in America. My relationship with Prabhupada has always been that way. By reading his books, making his books, and distributing his books on Sankirtan, and I've never felt lack of association. When I was editing his books, I felt completely fulfilled. just handing in those chapters every week. Because all I wanted in life, I know that as long as we try to please Prabhupada by preaching within ISKCON, then we cannot go wrong. So my shelter, when Prabhupada left the planet, was to stay in his society with the devotees and the preaching that is going on. I know that Prabhupada will bless anyone who stays in this society, especially his disciples. I know how Prabhupada felt about different aspects of the Mayapur project. One day, I was walking up the road when all of a sudden, it just flashed into my mind that this road is so sacred. That Prabhupada used to take his morning walk here. Feelings like that give you a stronger affection and motivation and devotional service in your project. You see us by God. And it's dripping water, and you know how Prabhupada reacted to that. That Prabhupada consciousness is there. Devotees come here. That's Untitled Prabhu, who was a pujari in Mayapur during Prabhupada's time. Devi Shakti Mataji is still in Vrindavan. Definitely one of those great heroines. Pushing it through, still selling Prabhupada's books. If we are going to live, we need to live like that. Devotees come here to Prabhupada's house in Vrindavan, and they become completely absorbed in the mood of service. Many of them just come and sit here alone and remember Prabhupada while chanting. There were so many intimate experiences here for many of Prabhupada's devotees, just in these few rooms. So I realized that Prabhupada's house is a special place for so many of Prabhupada's loving disciples who had many personal exchanges with Prabhupada here. If the place is not being taken care of nicely, that's an offense to them as well, because it means that Prabhupada's memory isn't being maintained nicely. Rohini Nandan Prabhu. I probably read the books about 4 or 5 times since Prabhupada left the planet. And one thing I can say is that I've begun to feel that I'm actually with Prabhupada when I read his books. I think now is the time. I think now is the time to sit down with Prabhupada. Just as if Prabhupada were coming to your temple. If you could get away and listen to him speaking, you certainly should. When the Guru is speaking, the disciple should come as soon as possible. So in that way, I try to give time every day to reading Prabhupada's books. Bahuda Prabhu, America. I think my relationship with Prabhupada, to a large extent, revolves around duty. He gave me my service. And I think that a devotee should not ask for any different service. He should have his service given him by his spiritual master until he's asked to do something else, even if that means he does it all his life. It took me about 10 years to come to this point. Before this, there would always be doubts coming in that maybe something else. Maybe I'm not so suited to this and should do something else. But I think that in most cases it is Maya. A devotee is given a certain service, and just like in any army, you have to do your duty even if you're going to be killed. This is for me a very strong principle in my consciousness of Prabhupada, that I cannot give up the duty of pushing on Krishna consciousness in my area. This Prabhupada. Thank you very much, and all the devotees, for offering me a garland daily, as you were doing when I was physically present. If a disciple is constantly engaged in carrying out the instructions of the spiritual master, he's supposed to be constantly in company with the spiritual master. This is called Vani Seva. So there are 2 kinds of service to the spiritual master. One is called Vani Seva. The other is called Vapu Seva. Vani Seva means executing the instruction. And Vapu Seva means physically, personally rendering service. So in the absence of physical presentation of the spiritual master, that means in the absence of the physical presence of the spiritual master, the Vani Seva is more important. Service to his instructions is more important. Okay. Let me just put a note. Chapter 1. That was nice. Okay, any questions? No questions? All right. If you have any questions, you can bring it up in Telegram also. Okay. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripasinubhyo vacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha.